Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream on History by Podcast. And today I'm joined by my co-host DJ Shonsky and also Dr. Robert M. Price. Bob, it's been a couple of years. It's good to have you back on.
Oh, it's great to be back on, as they always say, but it's true.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. We were originally going to discuss the misunderstanding that Bob and I had in the past. And, I apologized to him and he apologized to me about the misunderstanding. But Derek is putting out a video. The truth about what really happened is coming out. I was literally on the phone with him, listening to him edit the video and stuff. So it's coming out. It's probably going to come out while we're live. So if y'all want to know what happened, it's going to be in that video. But that being said, Bob, there's really a trend that's come back now. Renewed interest in Dutch radical thinking, Dutch radical scholarship. Did Paul actually exist? Did he actually write 7 letters or any letters at all? Did he even exist? Now, your position is still that historical Paul didn't write any of the letters. So I ask you, did Paul actually exist in your view?
Yeah, I think so, because as I understand Nina Livesey's theory about there not having been a Paul, it seems like she's on the one hand, she's saying that there's no need for one because it's like she didn't use this analogy, but like there's no screw tape, even though there's a collection of screw tapes letters, and I see that. But also on the other hand, she says that the author of Acts plays a kind of a double name game, and that somehow makes her say that there's no Paul. Yet one of the pieces of evidence she points to is the character Sergius Paulus, and it's only after the little anecdote with him is told that the writer of Acts also says, now Saul, who was also Paul, did this, that, and the other thing, and from there on in we don't hear of a Saul anymore, but a Paul. That almost undermines her argument, since she herself points out that there was a well-known Sergius Paulus who was a functionary of the Roman government. And so you could say, well, the writer of Acts just liked the name and borrowed it. That would make some sense. But on the other hand, she's sort of almost saying there was a historical Paul. It just wasn't a guy who wrote these epistles. I don't want to make anything out of that, but it's pretty iffy. It's plausible to me. But one thing she doesn't take into account, and nor should she have given her approach, is this case that the historical Paul was Simon Magus, whichever name was his actual moniker in his career. And because there's this, I believe, began with Gustav Volkmar, one of the Tübingen disciples of F.C. Bauer, who was the first to point out that in Acts, its story of Simon Magus witnessing the laying on of hands by Peter and John, the unique apostolic prerogative, which is kind of the whole point, because even the Samaritan baptized converts could not receive the Spirit until apostles from Jerusalem arrived. Philip the deacon wasn't good enough. Simon, himself a magician, gets converted and wants to join in, apparently, with Peter and John. He says, I'll gladly pay you if you will show me how to do this. Apparently, we're to assume that there was some visible manifestation, no doubt speaking in tongues, given the analogy to the other reception of the Holy Spirit stories in Acts. And then he's not just asking, can you sell the secret of this trick to a fellow trickster, because the repudiation that Peter gives him is, you have neither lot nor part in this ministry, in this word. He says, instead, I can see right now you're headed for the chains of agony and anguish in hell. And he said, no, please pray to the Lord that this may not happen. And Volkmar said, this has a ring of familiarity about it, because isn't that couldn't you understand that as another alternative account of what Paul says in Galatians? That he went to the pillars, Cephas, John, and James, seeking recognition for his gospel ministry, and they were willing to accommodate him, but it sure would be nice if he would feather the nest with some contributions from his much larger Gentile constituents. And he said, well, sure. And then, of course, he says, unfortunately, these guys didn't hold up their end of the bargain once their people came to dogging my heels, saying, don't listen to Paul after all. And then there are hints in Acts and Romans that it was believed Paul had brought this collection to Jerusalem, and it was thrown right back at him. And that would be Peter's repudiation of Simon Magus. Now, then, if you compare that, as Robert Eisenman does, with Paul as fitting the role of the mocker, the scoffer, the spouter of lies in Qumran, who repudiated the covenant in the midst of the community by selling smooth things, the easy way to the simple ones of Ephraim, and creating an alternative community built on blood, and that's what made the breach. Well, that fits in so well with the story of Simon Magus as the planned successor of John the Baptist in his sect, and his being away at the time of John's death, therefore forfeiting the office to Dositheus, but regaining it after a dispute with Dositheus, who then started his own thing down the road, hanging out his own Gnostic shingle. And all of these things, plus, one other thing, in Josephus, the notion that the entourage of Herod Agrippa II, Felix, Festus, Bernice, and Drusilla included a magician named Simon. And Paul is associated with the same circle of people with whom he has a not quite adversarial relation. They're interested in what he says and so on. I think that these pieces form a coherent puzzle, and that, as von Manen said long ago, there was a Paul, but he wasn't necessarily an epistle writer, but he was such a big name that people used it as a credential for their own writings, presumably in his tradition. Just one last thing. Mainstream scholars, even including Bultmann, have said that there are 7 authentic Pauline epistles, which means nearly half the ones with his name on them are spurious creations of a cottage industry that is even mentioned in the Pauline epistles, right? Don't be set off by some phony letter with my name on it. And it, more than once, he says, you see these big letters, it's the way I sign my authentic letters, so don't be fooled. In other words, they're already saying there's a production of Pauline letters that he didn't write. Well, if all of the writings attributed to Peter are dismissed by critical scholarship as pseudepigraphical, and they are, the 4 letters, 2 in the canon, 2 not, the Acts, the Revelation, the preachings, etc., the Apocalypse of Peter, what is the big deal with saying that there may be reasons enough to say that none of the letters attributed to Paul or by him either on the same grounds. Big name, or fabrication of Jesus sayings. No critical scholar thinks that didn't happen at all. So why is there this insistence that yes, there was a Paul? He at least wrote the big letters, the big seven or the big four that Bauer accepted. Well, I think it's residual Protestantism that these guys can feel free to dissolve the historical Jesus into a bunch of sayings that he may or may not have said. But as Protestants, Paul is really the fountainhead of Protestant thinking. And so they cannot admit we can't really say there was this divine apostle. That's more than you wanted to hear. I'm sorry, I'm just congenital big mouth.
What do you make of Nina's argument that Acts doesn't mention Paul's letters because they did not exist yet?
Oh, that's quite likely, I think. Now, Richard Purvo and others have thought that Acts does know the letters and uses them occasionally, though it twists things, like Paul escaping Damascus in a big basket. It was sort of a folktale type thing, and others. But I don't think that's a necessary inference. It's just, at the most you can say is there were certain things told about this missionary Paul that were common belief, especially if there were Paulinist communities or Simonian or Gnostic. The earliest actual Paulinists we know of from their own documents are Marcionites and Gnostics. The assumption that there were proto-Orthodox, basically proto-Protestant Pauline churches is simply inferred from the perhaps fictive narratives of these letters. We don't know that there were actually, and there's no other trace of churches in some of these places. So that would make sense to me. And so that once he's a big name, the letters appear, and a sanitized, Catholicizing version of him appears in Acts, trying to heal the breach between Ebionites and Gnostics and Marcionites.
Derek, thank you very much for your super chat. I love all three of you guys. Thank you for bringing my old pal back. Does Bob think Nina and Vincent will shift the wind in academia?
I suspect so. For one thing, just politically, it helps that she's a woman. And in this kind of overcompensation, there's a tendency to say, well, if a woman says it, we got to pay attention to it. But people should, because it doesn't matter who or what she is. I mean, she could be a monkey typing at random on a computer somewhere, or an chat bot could have written it. What wouldn't matter. It's a very convincing, compelling, extremely well researched and argued case. And the fact that she's able to make it as a member of the Paul seminar of the West Star Institute, like when Darrell Dowdy and I were members of that group 20 years ago, and we began to make the case for Dutch radicalism, we practically got laughed out of the seminar room. They just couldn't take it seriously. But now apparently they can, because she's not the only one that's saying this. You got Marcus Vincent and why can't I think of the name? It's because I have to think of it. Litwa, M. David Litwa, and others say that, yeah, he didn't write these. So for some reason, the winds change. And I think there's going to be more and more, as a young Turks promote a new paradigm, it's going to get more and more serious attention. Not that it matters to me, right? I have no real dog in the race. I don't care if people think that Jesus wrote them or that they were written in the 1950s. I don't have any stake in this. It's just a speculative theory that seems favorable to me.
When would you say the Pauline epistles were actually written?
I think that like the Gospels, I think mid to late second century, before, and if Marcus Vincent is right, probably Marcion started the ball rolling, and he and his students must have compiled some of their own Paulinist, that is Marcionite writings. And that's one place where I differ with Livesey. She is on the model of Seneca's moral epistles. She seems to be saying that some common author wrote all these, and what's artificial is as if they were letters. It's artificial in the same way Plato's dialogues were. It's just a clever, effective way of communicating the ideas. I, however, think that you can't ignore the kind of thing that von Manen also pointed out, that the Pauline epistles read like patchwork quilts of rival Paulinist opinions on various topics, especially Romans 9 through 11, which seems to me to have three different components arguing three different subjects, and the whole of First Corinthians, which looks like a digest where one chapter contradicts the one before it. And I don't think she can explain that so well. Not that she tries to. She's just roughing out a general paradigm of non-Pauline authorship. But I think if you take that into account, you can kind of combine her approach with that of Marcus Vincent, because I guess I'm saying I think Marcion and his students compiled the epistles in the same way that Marcion finally put together his gospel, combining his first draft with elements he liked from the pirate editions of the so-called forgeries he condemned that are our four gospels. I think that's a very, very close analogy, that they put together bits and pieces by different Paulinists or Marcionites and some others. And then that, of course, is for all but the three pastorals that were Catholicizing supplements, perhaps originally intended to replace the 10 Marcionite epistles.
Now, Sean, I noticed some things you wanted to bring up, so we're bringing your questions.
Yeah, just a little bit about Dettering's work, dealing with the Simon Magus claim, if you will. We had talked about it a little bit, but a little bit more. I just wanted a little bit more detail about that, if you could.
Well, let's see. He brings up the artificiality of it. Now I'm beginning to forget what I got from where. The thing about the signature, claiming that, you see, these are genuine because of my signature. That I kind of noticed after reading a book on narratology by, I think it's Gerald Prince. He's not talking about the epistles, but it brings up the same sort of thing, that's actually a sign of pseudepigraphy rather than authenticity. Let's see, he deals with how he thinks Dettering deals with how Paul may be a kind of Gnostic tinged nickname for Simon. And it's, as I recall, it's been some years now, it had to do with an apocryphal saying, seek ye to go from the less to the greater, or something, and that there was some Gnostic association with the smallness. I've forgotten what that is now, though. Well, yeah, he went along with von Manen, I believe, on the claim that if if Paul actually wrote this between the 50s and 60s, would we really expect to hear the references to keeping the traditions that Paul had introduced to the churches? I mean, if he had started these churches to whom he is ostensibly writing only a decade or so later, would you be talking about Pauline traditions? You can't prove it's impossible, but it sounds a little odd. Or the retrospective look you get, well, I started the Corinthian church, like I planted it and Apollos watered it and so and so. It looks like a retrospective, like looking further back than Paul would have been situated historically to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What else? These guys kind of run together in my mind after a while.
No, I got you.
But he named a lot of these. Not that there were a lot of them, but he named several of these original Dutch radicals. In fact, I thought that I quipped in my review of Livesey's book. She could have called the book "Reveille for Dutch Radicals," borrowing from our buddy there, because she has a new spin on it, though. I have to say, the idea that they originated as a collection, almost a novelistic, almost an epistolary novel. Pervo did an article for me in the first issue of the Journal of Higher Criticism about the pastoral epistles as being a kind of epistolary novel. And that's kind of what she's saying, too. But Dettering had various other... Oh, yeah, I know one contribution of his was he was saying it's not like Simon is a caricature of Paul, but that we're talking about the historical Simon who was rechristened Paul when the Catholicizing redactors decided, well, we're trying to rehabilitate the founder of these Gnostics and keep him as a saint and a hero. But what about that Gnosticism that we're repudiating? Let's cut the guy in half and have Simon the sorcerer be the father of Gnosticism, and Paul being the founder of true Christianity. And so that it's one of these bifurcations of a character for the sake of Catholicizing. We're done with polemics against this guy. We're trying to heal the breaches between the different Jesus movements. So we got to stop denouncing this guy as a false apostle, an antichrist, and a persecutor of the true faith. That's not going to get us anywhere. Let's make that into somebody else and keep the good parts and make that Paul the Apostle. And that makes a lot of sense to me. So Dettering is saying the historical guy was Simon Magus. After all, Irenaeus says, he said, you're not saved by keeping the laws of the Torah. They were given by angels, which is what Paul is ostensibly saying in Galatians. So it seems like Simon was remembered as being very much like teaching like Paul, but not like the emerging Catholicism. And then there's that claim that Irenaeus preserves that Simon claimed he had been the crucified Jesus, and that it was a docetic crucifixion, which dovetails with Basilides saying it wasn't Jesus on that cross. It was Simon of Cyrene, who equals Simon of Gitta, Simon of the Kittim, Simon of the Sea Peoples, which included Cyrene. And if it all fits together amazingly well, and Dettering was the first to point out a good bit of that, though he's admittedly building on Volkmar and Bauer and von Manen.
Yep, thanks.
We got another super chat. Great to have you back, Dr. Price. Is Juan Clement any evidence for Paul having written letters? And thank you, Michael Lee.
Say that. Let me just read it. Get my glasses on here. First Clement. First Clement is an attestation that there was at least a document credited to Paul. You take up your Paul's letter to you, Corinthians. Well, for one thing, it's difficult to date this, and I tend to date it pretty late. There's no name on it. Tradition alone says it was by Clement. And as to internal evidence for it, you know where it says that Peter and Paul were both killed because of jealousy? What is that supposed to mean? I think the most obvious reference is to the apocryphal Acts of the Apostles that flourished in the late 2nd and 3rd centuries, in every one of which, and there were 5 major ones. They used to think they were all by the same author, Lucius. But in every one of them, you got John, Peter, Paul, Thomas, and Andrew. The apostle comes into town preaching the gospel of encretism, celibacy. You can't have sex and enter the kingdom. If you're married, you got to swear off, and you can be legally married, but no funny business. And this attracts a number of noble women who slam the bedroom door on their husbands, fiancés, whatever, and say, I'm sorry, I'm really wed to Christ now, and I'm devoted to his representative, Paul, Peter, whoever. Well, the husband or fiancé or boyfriend isn't taking this lying down. And it so happens in every one of these that it's somebody who has connections with the king, the governor, whoever it happens to be, and says, hey, look, this guy, this charlatan gigolo is alienating the affection of our women, and who knows what he's doing with them. Can't you put a stop to this? And so, yeah, you bet I can. I get rid of this homewrecker. And that is why the apostle is arrested and martyred. Not because he's preaching Jesus, but because he's preaching celibacy. And that's how they get killed. And sometimes it doesn't end there. John and Paul are even resurrected and ascend into heaven. So it's this that I think makes perfect sense of First Clement's claim that it was because of jealousy, that is husbandly jealousy, that they were martyred. And this is the only basis we have for when Paul was supposedly killed. The only thing that enables people to think they can date it is the Acts of Paul, where he's a contemporary of Nero. That's no historical evidence. Do you think Paul was beheaded and then, like Alfred Hitchcock, walked right back in holding his head and telling him, Nero, that he's next? I mean, it's absurd. You can't take this as evidence. And so it's I think it's useless for proving how many letters there were under Paul's name circulating or whether he wrote them.
We had also, Jacob's back. We had also talked a little bit. It's not dealing with the text itself, but images of Paul. Images of Paul don't appear until about 250 years after he dies. Very, very late 3rd century and then early into the 4th century in the catacombs, basically. And these images remain pretty consistent throughout the ages. You know, what were your thoughts about that? It was just a general question.
Well, I think that I've read, I believe it's in Abraham Mallarby's book, Paul of the Popular Philosophers, where he's showing how strongly influenced the Pauline epistles are by Stoicism, that he points out that the Stoics liked to use Hercules as a character paradigm, and that Hercules was at the time depicted in much the same unflattering way that Paul was, bald, unibrow, bow-legged, short, ugly, and so forth, which is surprising for Hercules too. He doesn't look like that in any of the movies I've seen. And
Right.
so that I think Jacob also was pictured, not our beloved Jacob, but the biblical Jacob, that so that they didn't know what Hercules looked like, since there never was one. They didn't know what Paul looked like either. And also, one ancient source depicts Jesus that way, also much later. So apparently, this was supposed to be a good caricature of a virtuous, resourceful hero. Surprising, but I think that's where they got it. In the same way that, like, the first portrait of Jesus we have is copied from a standard image of Apollo. So who knows?
Right.
Another thing I want to ask you, Bob, is can there be a Jesus and no Paul?
Oh, yeah, sure. In fact, the very disparity between the Gospels and the Pauline epistles, assuming there's any, whether or not there's a historical basis to either one, how come they're so different? Well, I don't know, but it certainly would fit the idea that Paul didn't need a historical Jesus and may not have had one. And there may have been a Jesus about whom we see some remaining evidence of the Gospels, which, however, is not reflected in Paul. So there could have been a Jesus, but no Paul. I mean, really, like somebody says in what Galatians and or Second Corinthians, you listen to those who preach another Jesus. Well, that at least plants the seed of speculation. Were there various people that used the name Jesus as some kind of a guru? It means Yahweh is salvation. We know there were various messianic agitators who were trying to repeat the deeds of Joshua, Theudas and the Egyptian and so forth. So who knows, like, which Jesus are the epistles talking about? And they're so different, there's really no problem. To me, it's very analogous as to if you're an atheist, that doesn't mean you think there was no historical Jesus. And then most atheists think there was, don't even have many complaints about him. And if you're a mythicist, that doesn't mean you're an atheist. It's a whole different question. The grounds for each opinion is different in this case, but I think this sort of disjunction between the alternatives is analogous in the two cases.
What kind of evidence would you... No, let me drop that question. I'm going to ask something different. Who do you think wrote these Pauline epistles, or should I say, who were they that wrote these Pauline epistles?
Well, I have a hunch that now, partly because of what it says, and partly because of what Tertullian says about Galatians, that Marcion discovered the epistle to the Galatians. Well, that could mean the fairly trivial statement, I don't know why anybody would bother making it, oh, when he first read it, well, it could mean that, but that's kind of a pointless thing to say. But it reminds me of Joseph Smith discovering the Book of Mormon, and Huldah and Hilkiah and the others discovering the Book of the Covenant in King Josiah's time. They or whoever didn't discover it, they created it. Or in Tibetan Buddhism, it was the fashion for a long time to say, hey, look what I found. Here's an old scripture that the monks must have buried in a time of persecution, but now luckily we have it back. Oh, come on. There's reason to think that, no, this is advanced thought, just like Gnostic texts that here's what Jesus really said to the inner circle. You didn't know about it until now, but now we've got it. Yeah, right. Or the spurious Sufi hadith of Muhammad. That's what I suspect Tertullian means. Or that yeah, that's what he's referring to. And so it may, because the stuff he says in it so Paul's attempt to get the approval of the mother church, the gift of money he brought, and the repudiation of it. This sounds a lot like Marcion's bid to become the Bishop of Rome, going there, making a big gift of money, and having it thrown right back at him. I think that's too close for comfort. It's sort of like in the Quran, where Muhammad is talking about the ancient apostles and prophets and how they were all ridiculed and heckled in exactly the same terms other surahs say he was in Mecca. It just seems to me a spurious historical parallel. But part of the beginning of Galatians, somebody argued, I can't think of his name now, that it seems to be a response to the conversion story of Paul in Acts. So we have, again, a composite document, part of the basic draft of it, Marcionite or even by Marcion, and then a Marcionite apologist trying to rebut Acts later, because I think all of them are patchworks.
We got a super chat from Jeff Warren. Thank you for your super chat. Dr. Price, amazing and interesting stuff. If Paul is a character split of Simon Magus and an invention of the church, do you think that Irenaeus knew of his creation deception, or was he also fooled?
I suspect he was fooled. I don't think he. By that time, I think the split had been made. Polycarp and some others before him appear to be in a kind of Catholic succession, and as we find in several New Testament documents like Acts, Luke, First and Second Peter, and so forth. So I suspect he thought they were separate people, but who knows? He could have just continued the policy. We don't really know.
Speaking of Simon Magus being Paul, what would you say is the strongest evidence that you believe supports the idea that Simon Magus was the historical Paul?
Well, two things. The similarity that Volkmar pointed out between the Jerusalem Council story and the Simon Magus story, that just seems to me almost irresistible. And second, Irenaeus's depiction of Simon's salvation by grace, not by deeds of the law, and the Pseudo-Clementines debate between Peter and Simon, who is obviously a Paulinist / Marcionite. All those things are so striking. It just seems to me they mean something, not nothing. That it just seems so implausible to say, "Oh, I know what it looks like," but it can't mean that. Oh, why can't it? It would explain the fact that the Gnostics all said, "Hey, Paul was the fountainhead of our teaching," whereas the Catholic apologists said, "Oh no, Simon was the fountainhead of Gnostic teaching." Well, maybe that's because they were both right, because they were the same guy. And again, they split him into a kind of mimetic, a set of mimetic twins, as Rene Girard would say. That's another whole area of research that bears on this. You have a kind of mythic symbol to reconcile two conflicting groups. And in this case, it winds up being two quarreling brothers or something, and they represent Cain and Abel and so forth. In this case, they may have split the one guy into two to try to exorcise the element of Paul that they didn't like.
What other similarities would you point to between Simon Magus and Paul?
Well, the fact that Paul, at least in Galatians, associates himself with the crucifixion. Let nobody give me any trouble anymore, because I bear on my body the marks of Christ, whose death was portrayed plainly to you, on the one hand, and what Irenaeus says that Simon said that he himself was the one crucified in Judea in a seemingly painful death that wasn't really. It was docetic. Those are mighty important similarities that, to me, point to identity.
Dr. Price, how does the Simon Magus identity affect the Saul Paul transformation in Acts? How does this affect that story in itself then? Is it just something that's just pseudo, if you will?
Yeah, you mean the conversion of Paul?
The conversion, yeah.
Well, that I think was meant to, that it seems to me is transparently borrowed from Second Maccabees chapter 3, where virtually the same thing happens to Heliodorus, an emissary of the Seleucid emperor, sent to Jerusalem to plunder the treasury, to give the money back to give the money to the emperor. He doesn't do it because while he's on his way to the temple, an angel on horseback appears and knocks him to the ground and blinds him. And then the Jewish elders, fearful that they'll be blamed for this, rightly fearful, they nurse him back to health. And he, in effect, converts to Judaism and tells the emperor that. And he better send somebody else next time, but the same thing will happen to him. Well, that, and then the story of Pentheus and Dionysus in Euripides the Bacchae, where Pentheus is the cousin of the incarnate Dionysus, who has appeared in Thebes as his own incarnate apostle. And Pentheus is, he doesn't like the fact that he's seducing the women again to become his maenads and to have these crazy parties out in the wilderness and leaving their husbands and so on. He claps him in jail, from which Dionysus is freed by an earthquake opening the prison doors, and then tells Pentheus, "You think you have authority over me? That's ridiculous. I'm in charge here." And he says, and he converts him hypnotically on the spot, and says, "Now you want to get a look at my maenads? Well, you're going to have to disguise yourself because men aren't welcome there. So here, go in drag." And he does. He says, "Oh yes, master." And meantime, Dionysus says to the audience, he can dish it out, but let's see if he can take it. I'm paraphrasing. Just as Jesus says to Ananias after he gets Paul converted, "I will show him how much he must suffer for my name." He's persecuting my people. Well, he's going to get his share of it. It is so similar. And there are other things in Acts that are obviously borrowed from the much older Bacchae, that I think that the story of Paul's conversion is pieced together from those two things, Euripides and Second Maccabees. And also more scholars are recognizing that Luke and Acts seem to know Josephus, and all of these things in Josephus's autobiography correspond startlingly to Paul's adventures. Why is that? Were they the same guy? Some think so. I don't. But that made me think, wait a minute. Maybe if the whole biography of Paul as we read it is simply borrowed from contemporary non-Christian sources. And I think that's what happened.
Do you take issue with Paul leading then this radical revolutionary type of movement with his journeys and travels, with there not being any non-Christian sources to that? Because he's, getting himself into trouble, and, he's always in these high places with different officials, if you will, or whatever, breathing down his neck. There are no extra biblical or non-Christian sources to these journeys. Then how does that sit with you?
Well, there's like no extra canonical, unless it's Christian apocryphal, evidence for Paul even existing. So it's a much bigger problem than that. But one consideration to keep in mind, Luke Acts is heavily apologetic. And to have Jesus declared repeatedly innocent by Pilate, and to have Paul brought up on baseless charges, that's both are a way of saying, hey, Roman readers, just like Tertullian and Justin and these guys with their apologies, or the, I think, spurious epistle of Pliny the Younger, where you got a Roman persecutor saying, I don't know why we're persecuting these people. They just get together like the Boy Scouts and take an oath that they're just going to help little old ladies across the street. Why are we bothering them? I'm sorry. That just seems to me phony apologetics. And I think that's what this is too. Was there such persecution, or is this an attempt to fend off later persecution of the church? Hey, our founders there were nothing to persecute. They were unjustly persecuted. Mm-hmm. So maybe no more than that.
Right. That kind of answers that question for me.
Some, like Frank Hughes and the late Bob Jewett, think that 1 and 2 Corinthians are a patchwork quilt of multiple letters that were put together. What do you make of that, Bob?
I think that's definitely true. If you look at Walter Schmidt's, he's got them divided up into nearly 20 letter fragments. That is a little more debatable in my view, but I accept, as some even evangelical conservatives, like a teacher of mine, the great Gordon Fee, thought with 2 Corinthians. He thought Paul wrote all the pieces, but as Schmidt's does, a radical Bultmannian, but he thought that somebody did, very much like the Gospel of John. The theory is that they didn't take good care of the manuscripts, and somebody's trying to piece together the fragments as best they can, and that might solve the certain jump cuts and things. Well, yeah, in 2 Corinthians, you've got this letter where he's patching things up. Well, from what? Well, then you got this little Qumran style fragment about no fellowship between Christ and Beliar and all that. And then you've got the severe letter where he really takes him on and starts thundering against why are you stabbing me in the back? Why aren't you loyal? Why are you spreading these rumors that I didn't visit you when I said it, I wouldn't, I'm untrustworthy, I had a good reason, etc., etc. It does sound like either Paul is some sort of schizophrenic, or that this is just a kind of anthology of fragments. And 1 Corinthians, though it's fewer think this about it, seems to me even more obviously a collection of tracts, I would say, because we read early on that Paul did not preach sophistical wisdom. Oh no, he preaches just the straight gospel of Christ crucified, like it or lump it. And Greeks seek wisdom, Jews seek miraculous signs. Sorry, got to disappoint you. And then immediately, well, actually I do preach wisdom among the elect, but it's a secret one. That's why you never heard of it before. And it's the archons of this age that crucified him. What? Uh, do you or don't you preach esoteric wisdom? And then we get on into whether women can speak in the assembly. Well, according to one chapter, sure, as long as their heads are covered. If they're married women, the virgin prophetesses don't have to. But in 14, somebody has added, now let women keep their mouths shut during church and ask their husbands what they want to know at home. Can apostles, can they be compensated for their work by those they preach to? Of course. He appeals to Deuteronomy and all that. And then he says, now, of course, I'd rather die than do that. It's going to look bad if I do and discredit the gospel. Wait a minute. Which is it? Can Christians eat meat previously offered as sacrifices to idols? Don't do it or God will kill you, as he did those guys at Baal Peor and all that. And then, oh, no, it's just like an all-you-can-eat buffet. We know these gods don't exist. It's just like going to McDonald's. Which is it? And on, speaking in tongues. You got in chapter 12, it's more positive. In chapter 14, he's trying to clamp the lid on it. And in chapter 13, stuck right in the middle, well, it's not that important. Love is the most important thing. This isn't the work of one person. And the chapter 15 with the resurrection, wait a minute, what is the problem here? They don't believe in life after death? Only for this life we have hope, or of all men most miserable. Or do they not believe that Jesus rose from the dead? Oh, sure he did. He appeared to this one, he appeared to that one, he appeared to the other one. Or do they believe that he rose, but that nobody else is going? What is going on? It just seems to me people have just sandwiched all this stuff together. And because Darrell Dowdy, my teacher and colleague, he pointed out something I should have thought of long before. He said that you ever notice how every commentary on the epistles is a matter of harmonizing the bits and pieces of it, trying to show, there's a train of thought from this to that. Like, why talk about Corinthian factionalism and then say we don't preach wisdom? What does the one have to do? Well, maybe it's this, and they tie them together with something the text never says. And you have to do that again and again. Why does he say that those who don't have the law have it written on their hearts and God will judge them based on what they've done? But you got to believe in Christ. And so on and so on. It just seems like it's a long time since we realized that's what's going on in the Synoptic Gospels. Is there a subject in the Sermon on the Mount? No. It's just a bunch of aphorisms strung together for convenience sake. It's no sermon. Some people say, oh, it's the greatest sermon. It's the lousiest sermon, if that's what it is. But it's not. It's a collection of bits and pieces. And so are the epistles, because of the same thing. There's no continuity. So it just seems to me that it makes the most sense that way. Whoever wrote them, somebody did us the favor. Well, it's like Genesis, right? It's a J, E, D, and P. They're different versions of things crammed together. Luckily, I mean, we're glad they put all that clashing stuff in there. It's like a scrapbook. We'd be impoverished if we didn't have all the different views and such. But the problem is, if you are a slave to biblical authority, oh, I must do and believe everything it says. Well, good luck with that. Unless you want to be a multiple personality also. I think every other day I'll go along with Romans 9. Then the other days of the week I'll switch over to 11 and so on. Nobody can do that. That'd be insane. So that it's just implicit theology that they think they have gotten beyond, but it still controls them psychologically.
Stefik, thank you for your super chat. Love hearing Dr. Price. Thank you.
That's good, since you're hearing way too much of them.
Jack Patterson, thank you for your super chat. Since the letters of Saul Paul were the earliest writings of the New Testament and appeared in the Marcionite collection, were they Gnostic at the time or Gnostic adjacent? Thanks, Dr. Price.
Well, yeah, I think they were. Colossians seems to me to be incipient Valentinianism. The whole of the divine pleroma dwells in Christ and so forth. And Philippians, the whole thing with chapter 2, verses 6 through 11, the kenosis hymn. He was in the form of God, but went into the kenoma, the region outside the pleroma. He emptied himself, and literally a kenosis, entering into the void. The speaking in tongues, well, like Schmidtall shows, virtually everything in First Corinthians makes sense if the subject matter is Gnosticism. Who was it that said, I'm a Christian, but I eat steaks previously offered to Apollo? What of it? These gods don't exist. Oh, yeah. I know we all have gnosis, but let's not flaunt it to people that don't understand. That's Gnostic. The speaking in tongues, who do we know in the early church that did that? Gnostics. Who baptized for the dead? Origen tells us the Cainites and the Ophites did, and he tells how they did it, how it was set up with the corpse on the top of a table and a living guy underneath, like a library table, I guess. And he'd speak a profession of faith as if it were the dead guy on top. And we know who did it, and it was them. Who was it who would claim to be inspired by the Spirit and say, Jesus be cursed? It was the Cainite Gnostics, as Origen tells us. That's no mystery. And so who were libertines that felt that as Christians they had no problem patronizing prostitutes? That was libertine Gnostics. Who believed that the archons had crucified Christ? The Gnostics. On and on and on it goes. And Schmidtall said, well, I guess that proves that Gnosticism was a first century phenomenon. Well, it might, but I think it's more likely the letters were written in the time for which we have ample evidence of Gnosticism existing. And so, yeah, that's just Gnostic, though different opinions about it. But that's the origin of it. Galatians, what is it but some kind of Marcionism that says God didn't give the law? He wouldn't have needed a mediator if it was him giving it to a group. You only need a mediator like Moses if one group is negotiating with the other. And that's what happened, because it was the angels who gave the law. That's Simon Magus and or Marcion. It just seems to me on and on it goes, that the missing piece is Gnosticism, and it's not really missing. You talk about not recognizing God, people don't recognize what is the saying in the Gospel of Thomas? If you recognize what is before your face, then you'll know, but you're not seeing it. And that's, or like Jesus says to Philip, says, Lord, show us the Father. That'll be enough. He says, Philip, have I been with you all this time and you still don't recognize me? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. What? It should be obvious, but it isn't, because it can't be. Oh, no. But I guess you have to finally say, look, let the chips fall where they may. Am I married to this theology, or do I prefer to understand the text? I may not be able to do both. And I faced that crossroad years ago.
Sean, you have any questions you want to ask?
Well, that kind of answered what I was going to ask him, and it had to do with Paul using Old Testament legalism at his convenience. And when he didn't want to use Old Testament legalism, he didn't. You don't have to be circumcised. You don't have to follow the dietary laws, but you still need to keep certain laws, especially women. Be quiet in the churches, etc. Like, how do you? What's your take on, if you want to keep cooking with it? What's your take on Paul's use of Old Testament legalism at his convenience, but when he doesn't feel like using the legalism, it's like he's kind of anti-Torah, if you will, anti-Judaism? What's your take on that whole flip-flop of
Well, for
Paul?
one thing, that
Keep
thing in
going.
chapter 14, it seems to be an attempt to contradict the business earlier in the epistle that says women can speak in the assembly. And many scholars think it's an interpolation since it appears at two different points in different manuscripts. That doesn't prove it, but it seems a little fishy. But even if you don't have manuscript evidence, this would be a prime example of why I think it's a patchwork quilt. That you've got different opinions among the communities of Marcionites and so on. Like even in Marcion, in the Marcionite church, he said you shouldn't get married because you're just going to pump out more slaves to the demiurge. But if you're married, don't get divorced. Like there were different rankings and so on for the stronger and weaker brethren. So some of that can be attributed to that. But I think you in Acts, you have Paul conspicuously made into an observer of the ceremonial law of the Torah, the Passover sacrifices, the Nazarene vow sacrifices. Well, and I want to make sure I'm in Jerusalem for Pentecost this year, and so on and so on. But that's an attempt, just like in chapter 20 or 21, James says to him, yeah, pay for their sacrifices. That way everybody will know what they've heard about you telling people not to circumcise their kids. They'll know it's not true. Get my meaning? Okay. It's like he does it for show to the readers, partly. Oh yeah, Paul was a devout Jew, whereas in First Corinthians, I'm a chameleon. And when I'm with those who keep the law, well, naturally, I don't want to offend them, so I'll keep it. But if I'm with the Gentiles, why bother? That's going to sound odd to them. It's purely external, and it's just PR in a sense. But in the epistles, Dettering pointed out that when he does quote the law, he doesn't say where it's from, so that you might not even be sure that's what he's quoting. Now, the thing in 1 Corinthians 14, he says women are to be silent in church, even as the law says, which the law doesn't say, by the way. Nobody knows what he's talking about there, Paul or an interpolator. But usually it's morality. It's like in Colossians, it says, don't let anybody bother you about keeping holy days or dietary laws. That stuff's just a charade. But he say that he'll quote stuff like give your enemy food if he needs it and so on. But we don't know if he also quotes Menander and such. We don't know if it's actually citing scripture, or if it's the way Jesus does in the Gospel of John. In your law, it says, and scripture can't be broken, right? Well, it says, I said you were God's. Hey, all I said was I'm God's son. It's like using it. It's a tu quo que argument or something like that. I forget where you're. It's not my opinion, but this is what you say, right? Well, look, even your own thing says what I'm saying. So that isn't that tough to explain, even on the Marcionite Gnostic idea.
Who do you think interpolated the anti-woman material into First Corinthians? Was it the same person that wrote the pastoral letters, or someone else writing later?
Great book on that, as Winsome Monroe's Authority in Paul and Peter. And the subtitle is something like The Discovery of a Pastoral Stratum in the Pauline epistles and First Peter. And she shows on various accounts that the failure to fit the context, vocabulary differences, this, that, and the other thing, that a whole bunch of these things, like the Haustafel, the wives obey your husbands, children obey your parents, don't be too hard on your kids, treat your slaves well. These appear in, I think, Colossians, Ephesians, and First Peter, and she shows how these don't fit the context. Or Romans 12, is it, with obey, every authority is ordained by God, so God, the Romans don't punish the righteous, but rather the wicked. What does that include? Jesus. It's like a later bourgeois, let's get along here. We don't want to be a bunch of radicals like in the book of Revelation. And she shows that by content, style, vocabulary, and position, these things are interpolated. Several other bits in First Corinthians and other epistles too. A great book, also one by William O. Walker, Interpolations in the Pauline Letters. He's very good, pointing out a bunch of things that different scholars have suggested, candidates for interpolation. In fact, I tried to appeal to this in my debate with Bart Ehrman, that he says that you guys are just cutting out New Testament passages that imply there was a historical Jesus, because of course it would subvert your theory. And I knew he was going to say that because he does in his book. And I said, I'm afraid that's not so. And I went through every one of them and showed how the scholar who first suggested each of these things was no mythicist. It was all done based on context and so on. That's a kind of an important thing, and it does fit in here too. You've got some stuff that was just added later, though I'm also saying before that happened, you can delineate different sources in each letter.
So now I want to go back to Simon Magus. Why did they change Simon Magus into Paul? And when did this occur?
I'm thinking, you mean, well, it happened already by Acts, which I'm guessing was probably written by 175, not long at all before Irenaeus mentions it. We don't have a definite mention of it. There's a possible mention of it, a very weak echo, if at all, in Justin Martyr. But we don't definitely hear about it, I believe, until 180 or so in Irenaeus. And so Acts has already done it. Let's see. It needn't have been too long before that.
What do you think was the motivation, the cause for changing Simon Magus into Paul?
Well, to, again, this ecumenical Catholicizing thing. You had the Jewish Christians, Ebionites, whatever you want to call them, Torah Christians, who hated Paul. What are you saying? The Messiah of Israel came to abolish the Torah? You're crazy. And they vilified Paul. He's a persecutor. He only wanted to marry the high priest's daughter, so he converted from paganism, and he couldn't hack it and left, and he decided he'd get revenge by making trouble for us. And he's tried to persuade Jews not to keep the Torah. He's a bum, a heretic. On the other hand, there were the fans of Paul, Gnostics and Marcionites, and they said, well, Paul is the only decent apostle there is. Look at these guys. Look at the book of Acts. They're idiots. They never say anything right. They're always making stupid mistakes. Jesus is rolling his eyes saying, those faithless generation, how long do I have to put up with you? And so on. And so eventually, when they come together, you have a bunch of documents created to, like Second Peter. I know that some people read Paul in a weird way. The unstable twist what he says in his letters, but that's nothing new. They do that with the other scriptures. What? Peter knows of a collection of Paul's letters that are considered a canon of scripture. This is much too late, but he's saying, yeah, Paul is all right. Don't listen to people that misinterpret him. That's why First Peter sounds so much like Ephesians, so much like Paul. Somebody's trying, or Acts. Who's the first missionary to the Gentiles? Paul? No, Peter. Who is the guy that says, oh, the Torah has always been a burden, we're glad to be free of it? Paul? No, Peter. And so forth. So you've got each one portrayed in the image of the other, because you're trying to say, hey, look, if you like Peter, you gotta like Paul. I mean, what's the difference? The same God was working the same miracles through him. Miraculous prison escapes, weird healings with handkerchiefs and shadows, jail breaks because of earthquakes, healing the lame, raising the dead, so on and so on. Look, one for one, tit for tat. You got to like this one if you like that one. So let's get together. But if Paul was a Gnostic and the ecumenicizing people were also moving toward what Cosmogony calls nascent Catholicism, they didn't really like that. So they were happy to dump all the Paul stuff they didn't like onto this scapegoat character, an alter ego, Simon Magus, and to keep the stuff they did like, because they could make Paul into another Peter, and so that way we can say, yeah, your guy did have good points, and we know him as Paul, and he's not as anti-legalistic as you think. And I think Loisy said the idea that Peter had denied Jesus, it must have been a propaganda slander from the Paulinists. And the idea that Paul bloodily persecuted Christians, that's got to be a slander from those Ebionites who thought that he was persecuting the true Christianity by denying the Torah. That makes a lot of sense to me. And so Paul had to bear Simon had to be the shadow Paul. He was bifurcated into the two characters. Here's the Paul. This is what we wish Paul had been like. And this guy, oh yeah, we don't like him either. So they kind of redeemed him by splitting him in two.
We got a super chat from Jason Kukulu. Thank you for your super chat. Paul seemed highly educated in the question of Roman agent. Maybe he was executed by Nero for failing to prevent the fire. Fire started by lightning, spread by twisted cult of Christians. Some of this was shown on PBS.
Let's see. Paul seemed highly educated. The question of was he a Roman agent? I don't know of any evidence. Like there's a book called Operation Messiah. I think I can never remember the difficult to pronounce names of the authors, but
Figgis Voskulin and Rosemary Sheldon.
Boy, that's almost speaking in tongues. Yeah, that's exactly right. I had known her, I couldn't remember. I reviewed that book, and I think it's very clever, but it involves taking too much of Acts as historical. It's dealing with the data I mentioned as apologetics, trying to show Roman readers, as the apologists did, that early Christians were nothing to be afraid of, nobody to persecute. So they weren't rabble rousers. People said that they were. And I think they're taking that and historicizing it, whereas I think it's fiction, apologetic fiction. And Plus, I think the whole idea that is like a hair's breadth away from Roman provenance theory. It pictures Paul as a kind of a subverter of radical Christians to domesticate them, which I think there was no reason to do, because you already had an accommodationist post-Roman war Jewish establishment. You didn't need to build another one by creating Christianity, because when the Romans said, okay, you guys can have your Sanhedrin, but not in Jerusalem. It's got to be up in Joppa or Yavna, whatever you want to call it, and it's going to be exclusively religious, no civil authority anymore. Well, okay, they agree with that. I think that you don't really need this idea that Paul was trying to subvert militant Christians, that he was zealot or faked being one. It just struck me as interesting, but I admit a lot of what I say is speculative, but I think what I propose are ways of construing a lot of striking evidence, which I just don't find in this theory. It seems to me there are too many missing links and too much credulity in reading Acts' history. But it's a fascinating scholarly work. I don't want to, it sounds like I'm blasting it. I don't mean to, but I don't find it quite as compelling any more than I do the Roman providence thing. It's not absurd, but I don't find it convincing.
Yeah, I still think I still hold the view that Paul was an agent of Rome, but not quite in the same way. And I also agree with you that Acts shouldn't be used as evidence for it. So there are elements of what you said there that I don't have a problem with. It is another show that we could do at some point in which we talk about that more in depth, because I think that's interesting. That takes me to my next question about Marcion and canonical Paul. Do you think that Marcion's edition of Paul's letters came first, or the canonical version? Okay.
Oh yeah, I think Marcion's was definitely the original, because too many things jump out as attempts to hide that.
So how much shorter are Marcion's version of the letters compared to the canonical?
Oh boy, I'm sure that's been estimated by Jason Bedun and others. I'm terrible at estimating. I can't even tell you how many people are on the screen here. I'm such a poor estimator. I couldn't say, but noticeably shorter. They're like Romans in his version didn't have the whole section dealing with Israel, chapters 9 through 11, but this is a tricky question, because the Marcionite canon, in my reading already, was a patchwork quilt of stuff by different Marcionites and Gnostics who had different opinions, because of course all Gnostics, there was a jungle of different opinions, all within the same ballpark. I think that we find that reflected probably in the earliest assemblage of a Marcionite canon. But even at that, it didn't lack a bunch of the stuff. There were certain passages in Galatians I think couldn't have been in there in any Marcionite canon, like when it goes to the trouble to point out that when time came for God to send his son, he was born of a woman. Yeah, that's a big bulletin. What you have to point that out? Well, you do if the Marcionites say he wasn't born of a woman, that he just descended from the sky like Superman one day. But short of that, I don't see how anybody would waste the ink on that. And it seems to me that's got to be an anti-Marcionite interpolation. And there were others that are less obvious, but well, you can kind of tell, like the fact with Romans 9 through 11, isn't it odd that he virtually never outside of that, or whoever, I mean, the text of Romans speaks of Israel, it's always the Jews. But in these 3 chapters, suddenly it's only Israel. And he's not talking about ancient Israel, the kingdom of Israel. He's talking about contemporary Jews. So that's, you got to have some explanation for that. And the fact that it veers from individual predestination to different population groups getting converted one after the other in the providence of God. What's he talking about? Like 2 or 3 different things. That implies that, like, was all of that in there? Well, I mean, was that interpolated as a chunk? Or was that a series of 3 subsequent interpolations? I don't suppose there's any way to tell.
I want to go back real quick to the Roman agent thing, because this is something that there's a Christian friend of mine. He's a believer that follows my channel. He's also a lawyer. Retired recently, but he still does legal work to an extent. Douglas Del Tondo, and he absolutely hates Paul. I'm not sure if I've ever met anyone that hates Paul more than this guy. And he thinks Paul's a Roman agent, but he doesn't buy Roman provenance. And this is interesting, because I think a lot of people don't realize that Roman provenance and the Roman agent theory don't work together. They just don't. Because if you imagine that Paul was infiltrating the early Christian movement, why would the Romans create something, right, and need Paul to infiltrate it? That doesn't make sense.
Yep.
So that doesn't work. And when one reads Rosemary Sheldon's book and Figius Vosculin's book, Operation Messiah, they are not believers in Roman provenance. They clearly think that there was a historical Jesus, contrary to what actual, like, Roman provenance authors would say. And so, I mean, actually, most Roman provenance people don't even think Paul existed, quite frankly.
Really? I didn't know that.
And I think that's why they would, because in their minds, a historical Paul would be difficult to explain. Not only do they throw away Jesus, but they throw away Paul, so they don't have to explain Paul either. They just chuck all that away.
Wow.
But when I want to do a more in-depth discussion with you on that sometime, but
sure.
I'm going to go back to the super chats. Constellation Pegasus, thank you for your super chat. Good to see Mr. Price back. I have that Bible you mentioned years ago that caused protests and even book burning. Thank you. Yeah, I remember something like
the RSV 46 edition.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, I still like the RSV, though I chuckle every time I see a commercial for medicine in case you contract the RSV, the respiratory, whatever it is, virus. And I think, oh boy, words change their meanings, I guess.
Off D, thank you for your super chat. Dr. Price mentioned Cyrene is a province of the team Gita. Where is the evidence for this? Can we really prove Simon of Cyrene is Simon Magus?
Oh, you can't prove it, but this is not my theory, though I espouse it. It's that Simon is known as Simon of Gitta in, I think it's Irenaeus. And that was the Old Testament Gath, and where Goliath was from too. And this was one of the 5 Philistine city-states. And the Philistines were the sea peoples who also settled North Africa, including Cyrene. And so the theory is that Simon of Gitta well, sort of like, what's the word? Synecdoche, is it part for the whole? That it either means he's actually from Gitta or Gath, or that he's one of that population, that he was some sort of Mycenaean Greek ultimately, that stock. And but it certainly is, it's an ancient speculation, I think, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And especially since I've been yapping too long. I just lost my train of thought. Went off the track, I guess. And it may have something to do with the fact that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Ketim, which is another spelling and pronunciation of the same thing, are the Gentiles and the enemy. And if Simon Magus was Paul, but he was actually one of the Ketim, that makes it a really interesting square dance. But it is certainly speculative. I don't pretend that this is proven, short of some amazing discovery of hitherto unknown data. It's certainly a speculative thing. I say that about the Jesus mythicism, about virtually anything. I am the first to say that any historical hypothesis is always open to revision, always subject to doubt. You have to be willing to have it challenged and see if it can meet the challenge. And even if so far so good, it has to remain provisional, because you don't know the future. It may be that somebody will just notice something about the evidence, like I would say von Manen and Detering and Volkmar did, or it may be an actual discovery. Who knows? Like if Morton Smith's Secret Gospel of Mark actually was an ancient document, that puts things in a different light, but it's still debatable. I don't know if that'll ever be settled. Probably this won't either. I get into this, by the way, in probably more coherent fashion in my book, The Amazing Colossal Apostle, which goes into the Pauline epistles, interpreted. Oh, yeah, I have a kind of mini commentary on them. Yeah, there we go. Where I say, let's ask ourselves what these texts would mean if they aren't by Paul. What do they start looking like they're really saying? And then in my Holy Fable series, there are like 4 volumes of that. In the third volume, I do, again, a kind of mini commentary. And this time I say, well, if you keep up with my stuff, you already know what I think they mean from the epistles mean from the Dutch radical hypothesis. But now let's see how much sense they would make based on the Lucky 7 view of most critical scholars. And they do make sense. It's not like it's absurd or insupportable. It's just a question of you try both sets of glasses on and see which one, like the guy at the optometrist, right? Which one looks sharper, this one or that one? Which paradigm you're going to use? Which do you think makes more sense of it? And it's, again, I don't think these views I reject are stupid. The different things are plausible to different people.
Afdi, thank you for your super chat. And how do we square that with Simon Magus being called a... Okay, let me start over on that. And how do we square that up with Simon being called a Samaritan?
Well, I think the Philistine cities were considered to be part of Samaria by the time of the New Testament, because it's like, what do you got? Samaria, Galilee, and Judea, Have I got that right? Or Samaria? I can't believe I'm not clear on this. It overlaps with the 5 cities of the Philistines, so that he would be a Samaritan geographically.
Kathy Brocado, thank you for your super chat. That'll be super sticker. Thank you. So, what kind of person do you imagine that the historical Simon Magus was? What was his goal? What was he doing? What do you think about the man?
It's hard to say. He could have been a charlatan. I mean, we have the same problem with living gurus and so on. Derek and I, a few years ago, interviewed a guy in Australia who claimed to be Jesus in his second coming. Well, as I always do things like that, I do not try to belittle or refute people. I am curious as to, why do you think this? What do you think? And so on. So I asked the guy various things, like just to see how far he would take it. I said, was Joseph of Arimathea your father? And things like that. And what do you think of this? And for the sake of argument, I went along with it. Well, Derek knew more about him than I did, and said there is reason to believe that he used to think that he was Jesus, but then decided he probably was not. But his advisors said, you don't want to admit that. And so that he decided to continue it as a pretense. Now, I don't even know if that's true, but it could be Simon Magus with these tall claims of being the standing one who had come to Earth incarnate to rescue the Ennoia, the primordial thought, which had been incarnated as Helen of Troy, and was now Helen, who was a Tyrian prostitute who, like Travis Bickle, he rescued from the whorehouse. People, his contemporaries who didn't believe in him, thought, come on, this guy's just a swindler. He might have been. It's very difficult to tell. There were such people. And some people thought Apollonius of Tyana was just a trickster and a faker. Others said, oh, no, he's a Neo-Pythagorean philosopher. We'll never know. So it's tough to say with him. Simon is said to have had very grandiose ideas of who he was, but then there are like George Patton. He had a very exalted sense of himself as the hand of destiny and so on. Well, he kind of was. There are people that know they are great. They may have delusions. But it may be like Kris Kringle in Miracle on 34th Street, right? It may be a delusion for good. Who knows? It's really tough to get inside the head of, especially an ancient person of whom we have only fragmentary knowledge. But it's like with Jesus. Was Jesus a charlatan, as some thought? Or was he really the Son of God? Or was he just a guy that had a benign delusion that he was? And there were good historical repercussions from it. Joseph Smith. I once did an article called Joseph Smith, Liar, Lord, or Lunatic. And I said, well, in an odd way, he was all three. And I went through various historical individuals who were dubious or excessive in the same way, and yet they did seem to be spiritual giants and heroes. Madame Blavatsky, a whole bunch of these people, they weren't just con artists, so there's something of the trickster about them. I don't pretend to know. I'm just glad I ain't one of them.
Constellation Pegasus, thank you for the super chat. New Testament Revised Standard Version by Thomas and Nelson and Sons. Thank you for that information. Hard to believe it caused such a stir, giving truth. An apologist's nightmare. Back then, for sure.
Yeah, people actually had book burnings of this thing because it relegated
my other
dubious
co-host joins us.
passages.
Yep. Bob, continue. I didn't mean to interrupt
It's
you.
me. Keep going.
It had like the woman taken in adultery, the long ending of Mark, and the thing with the angel and the pool of Beth Zatha and the Gospel of John. They were all in small print and footnotes, and there were all these little notes saying, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Well, it's not in all manuscripts, but it is in some. The real fundamentalist biblicists hated this, and in the Old Testament, Isaiah 7:14, behold, a young woman shall conceive, not a virgin. And there's the obvious, I'm sure you all know the reason for that. But the fundamentalists were innocent of all questions of textual criticism, etc. And they said, you're hacking up the Bible. You're tampering with Scripture. You're invoking the curse of Revelation. Whoever takes away the words from this book and all that, you're in big trouble. Whereas poor saintly Bruce Metzger and the other RSB people, all they're trying to do is to make the Bible intelligible and to make sure you're actually reading what the writers wrote. And the big irony was a couple of the more important text critics of the 19th century were Plymouth Brethren. They were as fundamentalist as you could get, but they thought logically and said, now we believe in verbal inspiration, but that means we better make darn sure which are the real words of the text. If there's stuff that's been fudged, we'd be better without it. But the element of uncertainty, people just can't live with that. And so they say, oh, no. The Bible that's always been my scriptural teddy bear, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. I can understand that, but you can't do that as a scholar.
Scriptural teddy bear.
Oh, Liren, how you doing? I keep meaning to say hi, and I just can't get to everything. Oh, it's great to see you.
It's good to see you. I kind of picked up one of your hobbies. I also do big action figures. I'm going to put them behind me.
Good man.
I got this one. Let's see. I got this one, too. This one's smaller. It's not the size that matters, guys. He's tiny.
Bravo. Now, there's one of the Illuminati right there.
Yeah. We're going to make our own little action figure club.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to go back to the Marcionite edition of Paul's letters. That's what you say is earlier. Did Marcion write all these letters himself, or did he collect some of them from prior people writing in Paul's name? How did that work?
He may well have done the latter. It does seem like they're different authors, but that's why I compare it to what Marcus Vincent says about the Gospels, that Marcion did write a draft, but then he had sources for that. Like I asked him once, I said, where did he get the Jesus material? I said, my theory is that since so much of the gospel material looks like it's a rewrite from the Hebrew Bible, really the Septuagint, my guess is that Marcion, who didn't hate the Old Testament, in fact, he coined the terms Old and New Testaments. He just said, it's not a Christian book. Let's stop hijacking it from Judaism. It has nothing to do with Jesus. He didn't think it was the satanic Bible or something. So there must have been a lot of stuff he liked in it. He just didn't think it was the scripture of Jesus. But what he did was to salvage a whole lot of these great stories about Moses, David, Joshua, Elijah, Elisha, and rewrite them starring Jesus. And I mentioned that to Marcus Vincent. I said, what do you think? He says, yes, that is what I think happened. And so he was using sources, but rewriting them. So he could have been doing the same thing with who knows what materials. Like J.C. O'Neill long ago wrote a great commentary on Romans, where he says the first couple of chapters do not mirror or anticipate the theology of the rest of the letter. It's a Hellenistic synagogue sermon. It's trying to say, hey, fellow Jews, let's not be so cocky. We lord it over the poor dumb Gentiles. You think you're in good with God if you're not actually keeping the Torah? And do you think they're in trouble, even though they don't have the Torah, when they live out its values? Forget it. Don't be a hypocrite. And he doesn't say anything about salvation by faith or any of that stuff. You don't need to. He's trying to say everybody's potentially on the same level in the eyes of God. But then after that, you start getting Pauline theology. And O'Neill said, I'm sorry, this isn't the same writer. And I've been pretty convinced of that ever since I read that. And now that would be one of the things that Marcion was, as a Roman teacher, would no doubt have been very familiar with. He said, well, let's put that in. And who knows what else he might have borrowed. Now, that alone might count for the fact that as an epistle, it's Marcion's work, but he may have been a redactor as much as a free composer of it. So that's one reason I think Nina Livesey's theory is a bit oversimple, but by that I only mean there's more work to be done with it. I think it's great, and I think she's right as far as she goes. So there must have been some pre-existent material. Whether there were ostensible letters by Paul, there might have been. Like Colossians might have been written by a Valentinian. He would have known of Valentinus, also a schoolmaster in Rome. He might have included one of their works and so forth. Who knows? But he didn't necessarily write ex nihilo. But that does totally complicate the picture. And again, if the same thing happened with his Apostolicon, the letter collection, as happened with his Evangelion, his gospel, it would have been picked up by sympathetic readers who decided to add to it. Oh, this is great stuff, but you know what it needs? A discussion of this. Well, I'm going to add it. And this gets back to Marcion, like the four forged gospels did. And Marcion would have said, I had no right to do this, but I got to admit this parable is pretty good. It's in. And that would have been the same thing with the epistles. Who knows at what stage he or a predecessor put it in. So I think it's very difficult to nail this stuff down, but that's how I imagine it happened, chaotic as it is.
We got another super chat. Constellation Pegasus, thank you for your super chat. Hey, Derek, we are friends again. We all fall and make mistakes. I've certainly made many mistakes myself. We're all human, unfortunately, with mistakes. We'll all make in the future. Let the past be in the past. Thank you, Constellation Pegasus. Amen. So now, Bob, I want to ask you this question. So Marcion has a gospel in his New Testament, one gospel. But I don't want to make it too much about the Gospels. We're focusing on Paul right now. We'll save that for another video or live stream, whatever. When you look at Marcion's Gospel and what Paul calls a gospel in the epistles, does the Marcionite edition of Paul also make mention of gospel evangelion or something adjacent to that? Does it imply knowledge of a gospel, a written text?
That's unclear to me. Some people are now saying that, I bet it does refer to a text that he used. That would make sense. But then again, that brings up the old problem. Why is there not more evidence of it? Why does he not invoke Jesus on matters that the Gospels depict Jesus addressing? There's even stuff about speaking in tongues, depending on how you interpret it. Don't be like the pagans who say bata, 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 thinking they'll be heard for their sheer verbiage. That sounds vain repetition. He might be talking about speaking in tongues, or the render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. There's a bunch of these things. No divorce, don't separate. Why doesn't he ever say, Jesus said so-and-so? You're not going to pull rank and say the Son of God says this? That seems incredible to me. So I have a hunch that he isn't yet, doesn't have, I'm assuming the epistles, the Apostolicon would have been earlier than the Evangelion. Because after all, like when he says in 2 Corinthians, whoever wrote it, says that to this day, when Jews read the Old Testament, which he seems to have coined, also occurs in Melito of Sardis not long after, but it seems to be Marcion's coinage. A veil is over their hearts, because the God of this world or this age, who has blinded their minds lest they see the glory in the face of earth. Boy, that ain't Marcy. It might not be, but it sure sounds like it. The God of this world? I mean, there's another one? Yeah, that's what he thought. So he's but the reason I bring this up is he's talking about people that read the Jewish scriptures. So if he also has a Christian scripture that he's already written, the Evangelion, I wonder if he would have put it that way. Maybe he would have, but
Dr. Bob, I have a question. Is it, most people say New Testament, Old Testament. Would it be more linguistically accurate for what was written to say the Newer and Older Testament?
Well, I think in the New Testament itself, in the Last Supper, it speaks of the New Covenant, which is what Marcion called it, the New Testament. I think it's just the Kaine Diatheke or something like that, the new one. I mean, it might make more sense theologically, but the title apparently from the beginning with Marcion was the New Testament. So I tend to go with that. In the same way that I do not hem and haw over whether to refer to the Jewish Bible as the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, the Older Testament, the First Testament. Those all have theological dimensions, but that's not how I study and discuss it. I'm talking about the scholarship of the higher critics, just taking the familiar designation. So I am not doing theological exegesis. If I were, I might, change the language a bit.
It kind of reminds me how people are up in arms about what you call the Star Wars movies. Is it the original trilogy? Is it the prequels? Is it?
Well, yeah, that's a canon thing. Or Star Trek. There's some people that say only the first 2 seasons are canonical, and the third one that Roddenberry was still behind, that's not canonical. And how about the Next Generation? No, that doesn't fit. Or some would say it does, but Deep Space Nine doesn't, or whatever. It's sectarianism. It's amazing. It's become a religion. That's no news to anybody. Or the pre-Burn Superman, or the DC, what the heck was it? The new DC, or the DC Reborn, and so on. They keep rebooting it. Oh, in fact, that comics are great for analogies to this, because whenever the business about retconning. How originally the Gospels portrayed Jesus appearing as an adult, but then they start filling the gap. Well, what was he doing before then? Well, when he was 12, he went to Jerusalem and debated with the scribes. And then they start saying, well, what about his birth? That must have been pretty special. Okay, it was. The wise guys come from the east and so on. And then later they say, well, what was he doing as an adolescent? I bet he was probably striking down bullies on the playground and stuff like that. Like, what the heck? It's like nature abhors a vacuum.
Yeah, it's like how we got the backstory of Wolverine. Like before it, Wolverine was just a side character with a Hulk, and after a while, they're like, "Oh yeah, he was born in Canada, and he was in the Civil War, and he was in World War I and World War II, and he was in the super secret weapons." I'm like, how did we get here?
Superboy. Originally, there was no Superboy, but Superman succeeded so well in Superman and Adventure and World's Finest. Oh, what the heck? Let's make a few more Super Bucks and have Superboy and Adventure Comics, and let's put him in the Legion of Superheroes. And finally, they decided, well, what the heck? Let's go the whole way. And you get a backup feature, The Adventures of Super Baby. And here he is in a little blue onesie with a red cape, like my daughters used to wear. And he's picking up Pa Kent's tractor with one hand. It's the same thing. It's this apocryphal imagination. Or Jesus went to Tibet before he was baptized by John. It's like you just can't leave anything blank.
Fandom upholds a vacuum.
Yeah.
Afdi, thank you for your super chat. The medieval told of Yeshu text surely links Paul and Simon Magus. Could you comment on that? And is there evidence of Josephus as Peter in the story of Simon?
Yeah, it could be that Dositheus is Peter. I think Dositheus lurks behind Jesus in John chapter 4, that he says, if you knew the gift of God, which in Greek is Dositheus, then you would ask him for living water, and so on and so on. And he says, bring your husband back here. Well, that's going to be tough to do. I said, yeah, I know, because you've had 5 husbands and you're shacking up with another one now. And so forth. What's the deal there? That I just feel sure has to do with Simon Magus and the repeated incarnations of Helen of Troy as an adulteress and a whore. It seems to me you got interpenetration of these analogous figures. Now, the thing with the Toledo Yeshu, yes, I discussed this in The Amazing Colossal Apostle. There's this astonishing postscript in it where, let's see, is it based on, or does it actually use the name of Paul trying to persuade Jews not to keep the Torah? And so they appealed to Peter to oppose him and create Paulinism for Gentiles to leave Jews alone. And so they recast Paul as Simon Magus, as Simon Peter there. But it seems to me that somebody has slightly goofed up the original Simon Paul identification. But I think that I don't remember all of the stuff I said about it in the book now. But yeah, that is really striking. And there's more to it than I can think of. But naturally, I recommend my book, and no doubt find loads of fun.
One last thing I'll ask is before we close, why were, in your view, the Pauline epistles created? What was the point of it? And did the Pauline epistles know any written gospel at all, or do you think every gospel came after the letters?
The latter, I think, because it really is inconceivable otherwise why it's never quoted. And even in the one place where maybe 2 places, apologists say that the epistles do quote the gospel, it's not clear to me that's the point, where it says, this I say by the word of the Lord, if you're married, don't separate. Does he mean that he has a saying of Jesus? Because later in chapter 14, if anyone is inclined to dispute, if anyone thinks he is a prophet, let him recognize that what I write is the word of the Lord. And when he says that on another matter, in this case, I have no word of the Lord, but I think my judgment is trustworthy. Does that mean he's sticking to the Q document or something? And unfortunately, there's nothing about it in the index, whatever the topic is. No, I think that just means he has no revelation on it, or that it's just an ambiguous matter that he cannot speak authoritatively on, but that it's way open to know what he meant, and there are reasonable alternatives. And if he did have a set of sayings of Jesus, surely he would have quoted them several times, whether we're talking about Paul as the author or Marcion. So I would think that implies the Evangelion came about first, and that Paul was keep in mind that Paul comes into Christianity, even in the canonical New Testament, out of left field. There is no explanation as to what the heck he's even doing there. He's the apostle to the Gentiles, and the other guys are to rule over the 12 tribes of Israel. Then they don't go out into all the world. That great commission at the end of Matthew 28 is for the readers of Matthew's gospel in Antioch, a center of the Christian mission to the Gentiles, as we read in Acts. It's not actually Jesus talking to the disciples. And so that was a later development, but originally Paul was the only missionary to the Gentiles, and he comes from outside that orbit completely. Why? Why didn't Jesus just charge the other guys with going out there? Well, he seems to have what's this talk about another Jesus that Paul says people believe in? I have to wonder if he really came in from outside, and it was partly a financial thing, that he was the spouter of lies, so-called, and that he agreed, part of his agreement to render tribute and relief to the mother church was that they would have to accept him as the reincarnation of the Christ who had died on the cross, someone they did not yet believe in. And one reason I think that was that the pillar apostles themselves have a cosmic ring to them. The pillars, James and John, that's what Boanerges really means, the upholders of the vault of heaven, like Castor and Pollux, who were the sons of the thunder, or Zeus, and it all fits together. They are the axes mundi, connecting heaven and earth.
Axis mundi.
Yep, but there were two of them. So, and then like Boaz and Jachin, the pillars of the temple. And then Peter, he is the rock, the foundation stone, the navel stone in the temple that was the stopper that kept the waters of the Tehom from flooding the world again. So these guys already have cosmic divine roles. They didn't need Jesus, and my guess is they didn't have Jesus. It was just like in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There was a council of 12 and an inner circle of 3, and that's what we read about in the New Testament. And the Jesus character was the contribution of Simon Magus. You got to make him the figurehead, and you guys will be shoved to the side. You'll be his legacy and his vicars.
Sidekicks.
Yes. In fact, that's what happens with Moses himself, right? Once the high priest is so important, Moses is shoved aside as Tommy Smothers, right? God like you best. That Moses is just waiting around for Aaron to use the miracle working wand and all that. That's what Martin Note, what I call, I don't know if he called it this or not, but the redundancy principle. What are these people even doing in the story? Well, they used to be the stars. Moses goes up to the mountain to have a feast with God, and with him he takes Nadab and Abihu. What are they doing there? Well, originally the story must have been just them going up there. But Moses ascends in Israelite esteem, and so he goes up. But people expect to see Nadab and Abihu there, so they are there, but they're elbowed aside. And it's
Yeah,
the same.
it's kind of like how we actually see Luke Skywalker in The Mandalorian, even though it's like it's a Star Wars show, but it's about the Mandalorian. But Luke does show up at like the last season, the last episode.
Bingo.
You know what I mean?
I've never seen that. Yeah, that's
But you get what I mean.
Yeah.
Well,
Like you can't leave them out totally, but
Yeah.
we got a super chat that's been managed to be snuck in here. Afdi, thank you for your super chat. Appreciate it. And I appreciate everybody else for their super chats as well. My final question: is there clear-cut evidence that the name Paul is a variation of a Persian or Aramaic term for comforter?
the Paraclete. I don't know. I would. That is fascinating. I just don't have the linguistic know-how. But I know that the Marcionites thought Paul was the Paraclete that Jesus predicted. In fact, I think they were right in a sense. Bultmann, in a neglected comment in his great commentary on John, says that originally he wasn't so sure that the predicted Paraclete was not another historical individual that was coming to clarify the teaching of Jesus into the form in which it appears in the Gospel of John, why it's so different from the other ones. And that set me off thinking, well, then we know who it was. It was the so-called beloved disciple, who wasn't actually one of the disciples of Jesus, assuming there was one, but he's also the guy who was invoked as the witness in the Johannine appendix. Oh, we vouch for him. We know that his testimony is true. They're talking about this guy that showed up and said, Jesus in heaven has sent me to tell you guys the esoteric meaning, because that's the way it was in his esoteric Shiite Islam for centuries. They believe that, like the Druze and the I can't think of other ones, various groups believe that there was a string of 7 pillars of revelation, the patriarchs, not the writing prophets of the Bible, oddly enough, but Adam, Noah, Enoch, a bunch of these guys. And that similarly, the imams descended from Ali were also inspired teachers, if not actually incarnations. Some of them thought that was pretty chancy. And that they...
Yeah, the Druze believe in incarnation, that's true.
Say again, Larry?
Keep going. I said, yeah, Druze believe in reincarnation. I'm no that for a fact.
Yeah, the Gulat sects, the extremists, believe that Ali was God in the flesh. But even the ones that didn't say that sometimes believe that the imams would appear in pairs, very much like the Gnostic Syzygies and the Ebionites and all that. It goes way back there. And the first one was called the Proclaimer. He would give the exoteric meaning to the weaker brethren, those outside who only hear the parables but don't know what they mean. And then afterward, the second one, called the Foundation, would appear and give the esoteric basis of the teaching to the Gnostic elite. Well, that seems to me to be exactly what Bultmann was saying that the Johannine gospel envisions. Why does Jesus sound so different? Why is he making anachronistic statements about excommunication from the synagogue and all that stuff? Well, it's because it's not even supposed to be Jesus. It's a big poke in the ribs to the reader that here's the stuff that you weren't ready for at first. And the beloved disciple, the Paraclete, has come. So I see that. I mean, talk about a continuing thing from through the ages, linking all these religions. It's amazing. And so he was the Paraclete. Muhammad was the Paraclete. Montanus was the Paraclete. Mani was the Paraclete. It kept going for centuries.
I'm the Paraclete.
Well, we'll take
like,
the super
I am
chat,
Spartacus,
and then we really will end it here. Constellation Pegasus, thank you for your super chat. Jacob, you have to get Ben Stanhope on. His book, Misinterpreting Genesis, is one of the most studied books I have ever read on the Bible. The flat earth and dumb cosmology is great. Well, thank you, Constellation Pegasus. I'll keep that in mind.
Sounds good.
And I just want to remind everybody that actually, I didn't say this earlier, but I'll say it now. The link to purchase Dr. Robert Price's book, Amazing Colossal Apostle, will be in the description below in the pinned comment. That being said, DJ Shonsky, Luron, Robert and Price, thank you all for joining me today.
Thanks a lot. Thanks again, Dr. Price.
Thanks. Good to see you again, Levine.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Dr. Price.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.